On Friday, Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy told the Newsagents podcast that, quote, "It's self-evident that leaving the European Union badly damaged the UK economy," and expressed an openness to the idea of rejoining the EU's customs union, arguing that, quote, "Countries like Turkey with a customs union are seemingly benefiting and seeing growth in their economy." While the Prime Minister himself continues to rule out the idea, Lammy's comments sparked a flurry of speculation that the government might be at least interested in rejoining the customs union. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at whether this could actually happen, and why it might be more likely than you think. Longtime TLDR fans will remember that 5 years ago, we released a book called Brexit, the Colouring Book, a tongue-in-cheek, COVID-inspired way to relive the Brexit process through drawings and a detailed timeline written by our team. Well, we've reprinted that book, refreshed the timeline, and added some extra pages, and it's available right now in our store. And get 20% off for a limited time using code YouTube20. So, let's start by quickly explaining what a customs union actually is. This might be familiar territory for any of our long-time viewers or other Brexit nerds, but it's been a while since we've talked about it, so we think it's worth a quick recap. In short, a customs union is a type of trade agreement in which a group of countries agree to do two things. Firstly, remove tariffs on all trade between themselves, and secondly, adopt a common external tariff. In other words, agree to charge the same tariff rates on imports from countries outside of the union. This makes trade within the customs union a lot easier, both because you don't have to pay tariffs internally, but also because, in adopting a common external tariff, you also don't need so-called rules of origin. For context, rules of origin are used to determine where an import originally came from. Even if country A has a free trade agreement with country B, but not a common external tariff, you would need these rules of origin to make sure that the correct tariff is paid when country A has a different external tariff to country B. For example, at the moment there is 0 tariffs on electric vehicles between the UK and EU, which means you can easily export an electric vehicle from the UK to the EU and vice versa. However, the EU has imposed some pretty steep tariffs on electric vehicles imported from China, while the UK has imposed 0 tariffs on electric vehicles imported from China. This creates a potential loophole. Chinese companies could just export their electric vehicles to the UK before sneaking them into Europe, paying 0 tariffs on the way. To block off these loopholes, you have rules of origin, which basically require importers and exporters to provide paperwork proving where the product actually originated from, to make sure that it's paying the correct tariff. The point we're trying to make is that rules of origin make trade more difficult, even if you've got 0 tariffs. So in some sense, a customs union is an upgrade on your bog standard free trade area. Anyway, as you probably already know, the EU has a customs union, which includes every member state, plus Monaco, Andorra, San Marino, the British military bases in Cyprus, and Turkey, which formed a customs union with the EU way back in 1995, although there are exceptions for certain sectors like agriculture and public procurement. Now obviously the UK, or at least most of it, save for the bases in Cyprus, left the customs union with Brexit. And to avoid an issue that's long proved politically difficult for Labour, since September 2023, Starmer has insisted that he will not rejoin the customs union, the single market, or the EU itself. However, in the past couple of weeks, a return to the customs union has started to look more and more likely. Aside from Lammy's comments, there are broadly 3 reasons to suspect that an eventual return to the customs union might be on the cards. First, the government has started to blame Brexit for the UK's economic woes. This became apparent last month in the run-up to the budget, when Starmer and Reeves started blaming Brexit for the UK's weak growth rate, which is one of the big reasons they felt the need to raise taxes. The logical consequence of this argument is that rejoining the EU, or at least parts of it like the customs union, would be the best way to get the UK's growth rate back up again. Which brings us nicely onto the second reason. The government is desperate for economic growth. Starmer made this priority clear during his speech in Liverpool.
To do all that, we need 3 things: growth, growth, growth.
Growth would be great for ordinary Brits, but also for public finances, because more growth means more GDP, which means a lower debt to GDP ratio. Somewhat unsurprisingly though, Starmer has found economic growth frustratingly hard to come by, and many of the government's hallmark policies are expected to push it in the opposite direction. According to the government's own estimates, for instance, many of the headline-grabbing policies in the Employment Rights Bill, including making it harder to fire workers, are expected to have a negative impact on headline economic growth, at least in the short term. To be clear, we're not saying that these policies are bad ideas, just that, according to their own calculations, they go against the government's stated priority of increasing the UK's growth rate. Rejoining the customs union, however, is a pretty surefire way of getting the UK's growth rate back up, not least because a number of recent academic studies have found that the negative impact of Brexit might have been even greater than we thought. A National Bureau for Economic Research paper published last month, for instance, found that Brexit cut the UK's long-term GDP by 6 to 8%, roughly double the 4% the OBR originally estimated. Another paper by the Centre for European Reform's John Springford found that without Brexit, the UK would have registered growth rates closer to those of the US, instead of basically tracking France and Germany. The third and final reason is that this government is uniquely responsive to polling. This strategy hasn't really worked well for the government so far. Chasing opinion polling has led to a number of implausible U-turns on things like immigration, and given way to a whole load of contradictory policies. Because, well, public opinion isn't consistent. Nonetheless, polling suggests that Brexit is now incredibly unpopular. Most Brits see Brexit as a failure, and only 31% think the UK was right to leave, according to YouGov. Consequently, 56% of Brits now support rejoining the EU. While this isn't going to happen anytime soon, 49% of Brits also support rejoining the customs union, compared to just 19% who oppose it. You get the idea. This government is very much led by what the polls say, and the polls say that rejoining the customs union is popular. Now, that's not to say that it's definitely going to happen. Starmer has continued to rule it out, and it's worth noting that the UK-EU reset isn't going brilliantly at the moment. It would also complicate the UK's recent trade deals, including with the US. Nonetheless, rejoining the customs union would be a popular way of boosting economic growth, and could start an argument with Nigel Farage where Labour would be on the right side of public opinion for once. This won't be enough to win back everyone though, and Starmer has a long way to go before 2029 if he wants to hold on to power. If he does want to stay in number 10 though, and if you're watching Keir, you might want to pick up a copy of our magazine Too Long, which features our guide on the things that Starmer needs to do in order to hold on to power, as well as what Farage might want to do if he wants to gain it. Our magazine Too Long is now officially in stock, with the latest issue focusing on the reshaping of the Middle East. In it, we run through each country in the region to discuss how they're rewriting the next chapter of their story. From Qatar's growing global influence, who could govern the new Gaza, if Iran could dash for a nuke, and how Lebanon can disarm Hezbollah. This is a region we know a lot of you are interested in, so this latest issue dives deep, with our real thoughts on the next era in this often troubled region. Not only that, we also have sections focusing on UK, EU and global news, including our full rundown of some of the biggest elections which happened around the world over the last year. There's also our interview with YouTube's Money and Macro on how to fix the EU economy, the rise of the politician influencer, and the new left emerging in the UK. And as a special Christmas deal, we're offering you some gifts if you subscribe to Too Long. For instance, new subscribers can get a set of TLDR keyrings for free, our assembly-required desk calendar for just £2 more, our wall calendar or Brexit the colouring book for £3 more, or you can just get your first copy entirely free if you buy it alongside assembly required. Find all of those options by clicking the link in the description. Or, as always, skip all of that physical stuff by just picking up the digital edition today.